Okay, y'all, I am back. I have just completed a video that I'm titled Housing Part One that discussed a little bit more information on housing choice vouchers. If you can recall in that video, if you haven't watched that video, I suggest you go watch that video too, because this is a continuation. So it'll make more sense if you watch the first one first. But, anyways, so in that first video, I was like reporting that there is a total of, I like to break it down to four housing programs. Okay. And so, as a recap, the first one that I talked about was housing choice vouchers. So, again, that's where I really covered it in the first video. So, I'm not going to go into detail about that one. I'm actually going to discuss the other three. So, the other three is ESG, rapid rehousing, also known as RRH, and then also permanent supportive care type housing. And so those are the three that I'm going to talk about right now. And I'm going to share some information on kind of how you access either one of those three programs, what the eligibility requirements are, the assessment that's attached, all that good information. So if you have ever worked with a like street homeless individual, and remember, when we refer to street homeless or literally homeless, we are not trying to minimize homelessness um, and state like that. Any type of homelessness we recognize has needs. Okay. Um, but HUD has went ahead and kind of categorized different levels of homelessness. And so in a previous post, I talked about what literal homelessness was based upon HUD's definition. So just as a reminder of that, to be identified as literally homeless or street homeless, you have to be currently experiencing one of these sleeping arrangements. And so either A, you are literally sleeping out on the streets. Okay, that could include park, bench, um, outside in front of a storefront, under a bridge. I mean, you think about it, but literally sleeping outside. Okay, that would be considered street homeless. Another area of street homeless or sleeping arrangement for street homeless would be sleeping in an uninhabitable location. So that would include a vehicle, sleeping in like an unventilated garage, storage unit, things like that. So though there may be some sort of shelter, it's not an adequate shelter. And again, it's not a location that was intended for sleeping. So that would be considered street homeless. Another sleeping arrangement that would be considered street homeless is actually an emergency shelter. So if you have a client that is staying or sleeping in an emergency shelter that's identified as an emergency shelter under HUD guidelines, then that again would fall into that category of street homeless. The last one is the tricky one. Okay. So if you have an individual that's sleeping in a hotel or a motel that's paid for by an organization that falls under like a homeless hub that's been identified in the community as a homeless hub, then that would also be considered street homeless. So a lot of times we'll get folks who were sleeping in a hotel room and the hotel room's paid for by themselves because they can't access any other types of permanent housing. Though we recognize that that is a level of homelessness, unfortunately that does not fall under HUD's definition of street homelessness. Okay. Also, if that hotel is being paid for by a family or a friend, same thing. We recognize that it's homelessness. We recognize that they need access to resources, and that's not, a permanent, viable type sleeping arrangement. But for now, unfortunately, it doesn't fall under that street homeless. Again, that hotel or motel has to be being paid for by an organization or agency that is identified as a homeless hub in the community. So people will say, well, where are our homeless hubs? Does Johnson County have homeless hubs? We actually do. Our identified homeless hubs in Johnson County include the Salvation Army in Olathe, Catholic Charities, and it's actually the Catholic Charities in Overland Park is identified as a homeless hub. And then also Johnson County Mental Health. It's really the Shawnee office is the one that is considered the homeless hub. But again, we recognize that there's one in Mission, and there's also a mental health center in Olathe office, Johnson County Mental Health Office. And so really, if you were to go to Mission or you were to go to Olathe, they would get you rerouted to Shawnee if that's what needed to be, or the street outreach case manager could meet you in one of those other offices if need be, if you didn't have viable transportation. But again, those really are the three entities that are considered the homeless hubs in Johnson County. So you would have to be staying in a hotel motel. Your client would have to be staying in a hotel motel that was provided for or organized from one of those three agencies. Okay. So now that we said that, again, I'm throwing out a lot of information, so I hope you're taking notes. But I'm going to recap. So again, there are a total of 4 housing programs in Johnson County, but one of them being Housing Choice Voucher. Though Housing Choice Vouchers are also known as Section 8. Those do not have a requirement that you must be you must be experiencing street homelessness, okay? But the other 3, which I'm going to go into detail, ESG, rapid rehousing, or permanent supportive housing, those 3 types of housing programs in Johnson County do require that you are experiencing street homelessness, which is again the list that I just went over. Okay. So again, you're working with a client, or you run into an individual and you're talking with them, and I'm going to tell you the first thing I usually ask when I'm talking with someone is I ask them to explain to me their sleeping arrangements. I don't ask them where they stayed last night. I just say, hey, tell me more about your sleeping arrangements for the last week. It may end up narrowing down to me asking where they slept the night before, but I usually just ask them to explain their sleeping arrangements or kind of describe it to me. And that will help me kind of narrow down if they meet that street homeless, literally homeless definition. Now, we will usually ask, it will come down to, once if they say, hey, I've been sleeping in the park, then I'll be like, hey, is that where you stayed last night? You know? And the reason why I do try to narrow down where they slept the night before is because it can get tricky on kind of what steps you take. Because, say, for instance, you've got a client who's been sleeping outside in that park for the last 7 days. Okay. And then all of a sudden last night, they were able to come up with some money, or maybe a family, somebody came in and said, hey, we're going to go ahead and give you 1 night in a hotel for you to be able to get a good night's sleep, to be able to rest, to be able to take a shower, things like that. And say that's on a Monday. Say Monday night, they get one, client gets 1 night in a hotel. I will not have them I will not take them to a homeless hub necessarily on a Tuesday morning, or have them try to access a housing program on a Tuesday morning, because they won't be eligible. I know that sounds silly. It's not my rules, but that's kind of the trick of the trade for you to know that if you do have someone that you're working with, you do need to make sure and identify that the night before they did sleep in one of those homeless sleeping arrangements that we discussed, or it could knock them out of being able to qualify the next day, or the day that you're trying to get them into on the list for a housing program. Okay. So good to remember. So if I have one sleeping in a hotel on Monday, and then Tuesday night they're back out on the streets, I'm getting into one of those homeless hubs on a Wednesday, because then I know that there's not going to be a question about whether or not they're eligible. So we can go into more about that. It's like I said, it gets tricky. If you have any questions about that, definitely ask me. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to talk about is, so you've got that client slept the night before in one of those sleeping arrangements. Say they were at a park, or say they were at an emergency shelter, say they stayed at Project 1020, doesn't matter. Okay. And you're trying to help them get connected to services, which include getting on a housing list for permanent supportive housing through one of those, or more permanent type housing programs with one of those 3 grants. Okay. What you're going to do is you're going to need to contact one of those hubs. Again, Johnson County Mental Health, Catholic Charities, or Salvation Army. and identify that your client is experiencing street homelessness and ask them to get set up for a VAT. A VAT stands for Vulnerability Assessment Tool. Um, that is the assessment that Johnson County has identified to use in through that coordinated entry that we talked about in the last video with the COC to get people onto the list, the by name list for a housing program. So I am going to share my screen. Okay. So this is actually the company that we use or that Johnson County uses, the COC does for who they contract with for their or purchase their program to complete VATS, which is the vulnerability assessment tool. So again, it's through Desk and this is a good website to look at if you can see it, and go in if you want to learn more about what that vulnerability assessment tool is. Again, this is the tool that Johnson County implements. This is the tool that we use. And helping people get onto that list. And so ultimately, a vulnerability assessment tool is just what it sounds. It is an assessment that goes through different categories and determines a person's level of vulnerability based upon the answers that they provide due to a list of, like I said, questions, assessment questions that someone who is certified, a certified VAT assessor, because you do have to be certified to complete the VATs. Each one of those homeless hubs that I discussed all have VAT assessors there, certified VAT assessors. But anyways, they go through the assessment with the client that asks a number of questions that will help measure their vulnerability. So we do tell clients that they need to be absolutely upfront and honest. It's very difficult to be upfront and honest sometimes about your situation with a pure stranger, but that it's very, very important for them to be upfront and honest about everything that they're going through so that this VAT can do what it's meant to do and really be able to identify all the vulnerabilities and risks this person is going through. So people ask me, what is it trying to measure? And I say, really, it's two things. This VAT is helping to measure um, your likelihood of remaining homeless if not provided some sort of housing program support. So it wants to measure that. And also, it's just measuring, and this sounds really grim, and I'm sorry, but what your risk is or your client's risk is of dying out on the street in homelessness if they're not able to access a program. So, again, what's their likelihood of getting housed on their own? And what's their likelihood of possibly dying in homelessness? So, those are the two things that this tool is supposed to be assessing. Of course, this tool is not always perfect. No tools are. But again, we ask the client to be very, very upfront and honest about everything they're going through so that this assessment can do a better job. Um, but anyways, the reason why Johnson County has kind of implemented this model is because this model has proven to show that it does a good job of utilizing the housing first model, which we've talked about before, and really doing well at housing the most vulnerable first. So in Johnson County, we would love to be able to house everyone. I mean, I don't necessarily know if that, let me repeat that. I don't know or backtrack. I don't know if all of Johnson County would like to, but I know that the providers would love to be able to house everyone that's experiencing any type of homelessness in Johnson County. But unfortunately, we just don't have the programs to do that. So what Johnson County has tried to do and the program providers is to make a commitment that in the very least, we will try to house the most vulnerable first. And so that's why we have this assessment. So again, get your person connected to a homeless hub, have them get set up to complete a VAT. Once they complete a VAT, that's what gets them placed on the housing waiting list, the by name list, to access one of those other three types of programs. Now, housing programs. Now, I will say that a by name list is different than what we talked about with the housing choice voucher list, because the housing choice voucher list does have some priorities, but it is somewhat of a first come, first serve list. The by name list is not a first come, first serve list. It is a constantly fluid moving list. And the reason is that you are not placed, or your client is not placed on the list based upon when they got the assessment completed. They are placed on the list based upon their score of vulnerability. So, based on those answers that they give, if they score higher, and how it works is the higher the vulnerability, the higher their score is, right? The lower their vulnerability, the lower the score is. And so they are placed on the list based upon how high they score, again, based upon their vulnerabilities. Okay. So I am going to stop sharing this screen and I want to share another one. Please do not, you guys totally don't critique my lack of being able to draw, because I can't draw well. But this is an overall type scale of how the vulnerability or the VAT works. Okay. So the VAT, the vulnerability assessment tool, I told you that it's assessment full of questions. So the measuring vulnerability risks, or the categories that are being, asked about, is going to be include a category of these right here: survival skills, basic needs, indicated mortality risk, medical risk, organization, orientation, mental health, substance use, communication, social behaviors, and homelessness. So, again, all of the questions, there's about 30 questions, they all surround one of these topics. And based on the answer that is provided by the client, they get a score. And so, this is where um, they can start where they will get a score. So a person can score anywhere under 15, they can score with 20, they can score 25, anywhere above, anywhere in this area is where their score will ultimately be. Okay. So one commitment we've also made is that we want to make sure that we are providing the best type of housing support program that we can, based upon a person's needs. Okay. Because the idea is that when we're getting them housed in a way that will stabilize them, and also in a way that they can sustain. So, for instance, if I have a client and I'm completing a VAT for them, because I am a certified VAT assessor, if I'm completing a VAT for them and I get done with the scoring, and let's say they score at a 13, down here on a 13. Okay. So that's going to tell me that yes, they're experiencing homelessness. Yes, they have needs, but there's a likelihood this person is going to overcome their homelessness situation on their own. So they may never actually get assigned to a housing program, because again, they're experiencing barriers, but not necessarily enough barriers that would prevent them from getting housed on their own. Okay. Now, say that I'm completing a housing or a VAT on someone, and based upon their answers, they score up here. Let's say they scored a 27. That's going to tell me that they scored pretty high in all these areas and have a lot of risks and barriers that's going to prevent them from staying in housing or accessing housing. So if they're scoring at a 27, I don't want to put them, or I don't want, nobody wants to assign them to a housing program that's only going to be very minimal, and that's not going to provide enough support to them that in the long run they're going to end up being homeless again. Okay. So how we do that is we look at these three housing programs. I told you these are the three, right? So if we have an individual that scores within a 15 to a 20 range, then they get placed on the list. And then they are likely, when they get to that lit or get to that area, or the top of that area, because there's going to be several other people with them, then they are likely going to be assigned to an ESG program. An ESG program it includes, an ESG housing program includes 1 month of case management and 3 months of financial housing support. And it also pays like a deposit. Okay. So it helps the person get into housing, and it will help them for 3 months of rent, and it'll give them a month of case management. Again, that's not a really significant as far as like long-term type housing program. That's not going to give a lot of support. But again, if we've got someone scoring down here in these areas, they might not need that much support. They might need just that step up and kind of getting back into a housing situation, and then be able to maintain on their own. So again, someone who's scoring at a 16, we're not going to throw them all the way up here into the most significant housing program with the highest level of support, like permanent supportive housing, because that might be too much programming for a person. They might not need that much. So, looking at our resources and using them the best way we can, we want to make sure we're placing people in the most appropriate program that's giving them the level of support they need to be successful, but not giving them too much support. So, again, my person that did score, my first person, might not get a program, but my person who scored on a 27, I don't want to have them set up in an ESG program, because again, they might be great for 3 months, but that fourth month, they're not going to probably be able to maintain, and they're going to be homeless again. So again, they score here. If they score between a 17 and 22, they're going to probably place on the list here with other individuals and then get assigned a rapid rehousing program. Permanent supportive housing is way up here, and that's going to be the people who need the highest level of support. So going back down to rapid rehousing, when we look at rapid rehousing is not intended to be cookie cutter, but just to give like an overall idea, it is a 1 year of case management support. So again, much more significant than that 1 month that ESG was providing. But rapid rehousing will give you 1 year of case management support, and it will also give you anywhere between, we say about like 5 to 7 months of rental assistance. And again, it helps pay the deposit. So those people that are scoring between 17 to 22, they have more barriers. And so they'll need a higher level of support. So then again, we're going to pop back up to this permanent supportive housing. This permanent supportive housing, it is in the word, right, or it is in the title, permanent. So it is those programs that are going to provide more of a permanent support throughout, the rest of a person or family's lifetime, because of all the barriers that they are going through. They've scored pretty high. They show that they've got a lot of needs, a lot of areas that they're trying to work with. We're not only going to look at this necessarily always look at this housing program, but we're going to see what other supports in the community we can get them set up with, medical, supports, mental health supports, substance usage supports, things like that, because these are the folks that are usually got some significant things going on, and their homelessness and housing is just one piece. So we're going to work on housing first by getting them housed, but then we're also going to try to continue to keep them wrapped up in other services as well to help them maintain that housing. So in Johnson County, ESG, the agencies that have ESG money is Hillcrest, as far as with housing, is Hillcrest and Catholic Charities. They both carry ESG grants. So one of your clients might be assigned to one of them once they get pulled from the list. The VAT gets them on the list, but once they get assigned to a housing program, it could either be with Hillcrest or Catholic Charities. If they're in rapid rehousing, Safe Home and also Catholic Charities does rapid rehousing. So they might be assigned to Catholic Charities to do one of those programs. And then the permanent supportive housing agencies in Johnson County include Johnson County Mental Health and also Safe Home. Now we're going to talk about where some of the gaps happen unintentionally, just because though Johnson County has great programs, we still have a lot of limitations. So when we talk about that permanent supportive housing, again, I said Johnson County Mental Health and I said Safe Home. Safe Home being the domestic violence center and agency. And so to be able to access a permanent supportive housing support through Safe Home, even if when you score really high, you do have to be fleeing domestic violence and connected to Safe Home. So if you are an individual that might be scored in all areas that are really high, except for fleeing DV, then you likely or you won't, just plain and simple, you will not get connected to a Safe Home program. Okay. The other type of or permanent supportive housing agency is that Johnson County Mental Health. And so Johnson County Mental Health, to be able to access one of their programs, you have to be SPMI and you have to have a significant or a significant permanent or it's a serious permanent mental illness. That's what SPMI stands for. And you have to be a client of Johnson County Mental Health. So that's where we run into some of these gaps is we've got clients who are, chronically homeless that are really scoring high and that actually may score high and be carrying an SPMI diagnosis. But if they are not connected to Johnson County Mental Health or they refuse to be connected to Johnson County Mental Health, then unfortunately they're not being able to access a permanent supportive housing program through Johnson County Mental Health. So the point is that again, this is just kind of a breakdown. I'm expecting some more questions on this when it comes down to how this program works and things like this. This is not supposed to be a really extensive video, but just to give you kind of an overall trying to think about how VATS work, how the housing programs work, where the gaps are. I'm likely going to write just a little bit more of a post when it comes to this, or maybe a blog on this, but I just wanted to get you guys thinking. Okay. Well, you guys have a great night, but next time someone asks you what a VAT is, remember the things you have to really, really remember is a VAT can only be completed for a client who's experiencing street homelessness. Okay. Hope you guys have a great night. Definitely send me some questions. I would love to have this discussion more. Have a good night. Bye bye.